Welcome to Dory Cote on Shamanism, a weekly podcast that explores one theme in shamanism throughout each month. Get comfortable, have a seat, and let's get started.
Welcome to this week's podcast. We're going to talk this week, again, more about our tribal conversation. And this time we're going to talk about what is the difference between tribe and community, and how can we create tribe for ourselves.
So, Dory, how can people in our modern times create a tribe as opposed to what is generally called community?
There are ways that that we in modern day times can create tribes of our own. In my own personal experience, have found that when I work with a group of students who are, studying shamanism in depth and connecting, even though they only come together for a few days once a month, they create an intense bond on a spiritual level. And through no prompting of mine whatsoever, almost every year that I begin a new group of students coming together, I find them on their own calling each other part of their tribe. This is my tribe. And I've mused about that often, like, this is interesting that they automatically see themselves as a tribe. And it's not because what we're doing is Native American. It's really not Native American. It's very much an eclectic coming together of the indigenous beliefs and ceremonies and rituals of shamanic communities or earth-based communities from all over the globe. So the word tribe, I believe, comes up because the bond that happens within this fairly small circle of people, men and women, from ages, like the circle I have right now, the youngest person is 21 and the oldest person is in her 70s. And yet, despite the difference in age, the difference in the socioeconomic background, the difference in religious background and beliefs, they come together and they create tribe. And I believe that is true because they come to know each other on a very, very deep, intimate, spiritual level. And they are so bonded that they have each other's backs all the time. They stay in touch with each other. When somebody's in trouble, when somebody has a family member who is in trouble, they come together, they sing together, they journey for each other, they pray for each other, they work together. And that is true despite however many years they have been physically together in a circle. If I have students who haven't seen each other since 2005, they're still in touch with each other by email, by written letter, by cards. They share stories with each other. A student of mine from 2005 has just left to Germany. He's a counselor for the Army. Gets transferred all over. He just left for Germany, and people were like wishing him well. And they haven't seen each other since 2005. It's 2016. But they're still very connected in a very deep emotional way. And so, that's just one example of how people can create tribes. You don't have to be in a shamanic community, but it is so important to create a way in which groups of people come together for a common goal. For instance, I believe what has been happening in today's American political scene has in many ways been a way in which people have created tribe. Now, we could say, okay, well, some tribes are really not, for the common good of all people, but they are for the common good of the tribe. So, particularly with two different political campaigns, there have been groups of people who have come together who are passionate, incredibly passionate about the goals that they believe are the most important goals for everybody in America. But they are definitely the most important goals for the people who are within the, quote, tribe. And so they come together, and regardless, again, of age, race, religious, cultural background, socioeconomic background, or whatever, they create this movement of wanting to survive or thrive or create community around a goal that they perceive is a goal that is important to them and is important to everybody else within the tribe. So, that's a huge tribe. That's a tribe that crosses, boundaries from state to state, where people don't actually really know each other, but yet are working together with a common goal. And when that tribe falls apart, then the goal of the tribe will likely fall apart. That's my view.
That's an interesting distinction between community and tribe, particularly when our current President Obama came from community activism.
Mm-hmm.
So he knows how to manage and inspire and rally community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're talking about the Democrats and Republicans not as the tribes and having tribal intra-tribal conflict as well as inter-tribal conflict.
Yes, exactly. And it's the passion that drives it. It's the passion to, in the eyes of many of the people who are following a couple of particular political leaders, right? A couple of particular political campaigns. It's the passion. It's the passion of that is pushing that tribal energy. It's this is what I believe is right, and I'm going to work with every ounce of my being to push that agenda forward. It's really not all that different when you think about it from what happened when I was, a youngster in the 60s and the Vietnam War. And there was an entire movement that happened. We created tribe. Young people created tribe. We camped, we marched, we put up posters. We believed wholeheartedly, again, regardless of socioeconomic background, regardless of religious affiliation, regardless of age, although it was predominantly younger people, but there were a lot of older people as well, more mature people who were the leaders within that movement. And regardless of race, people camped out, they marched, they put up posters, they wrote letters, they did everything together for this purpose of creating an energy that would stop the war in Vietnam and get our soldiers home, move the minds of many, and work together to make that happen, even though those people, again, across the states of the United States did not, of course, all know each other, but there was a common purpose. It was a tribal movement. And in that case, my belief system is that was a good tribal movement. Other people would look at it and say, oh, no, that was bad because, there were people within the tribe who, smashed windows and burned buildings and did some things that were not, in agreement with really what the whole tribal movement was about, which was it was about peace activism. And when the tribe, when the goal was achieved, that tribe fell apart. We still recognize the songs we all sang together, but the tribe fell apart. The goal was achieved and the tribe fell apart. And I believe the same will happen, in the political situation that is happening in our country right now. When a goal is achieved by one party, the tribe of
disbands.
Is disbanded. Exactly. Is disbanded.
Each of those three tribes you're talking about has some similar qualities in that it has a name and it has a symbol.
Yes.
So there were Republicans, Democrats, and flower children.
Right. Exactly.
With donkeys,
yes,
elephants, and flowers.
Yes, and peace symbols. Exactly.
Peace symbols. And it's interesting that the Democrats and Republicans no longer use donkey and elephant. You just don't see it that much.
Not as much as before. That's right.
It's red and blue instead. That's their war paint.
Yes, exactly.
And what they do is territory. Right now, they're trying to capture territory with these votes. It's like capture the flag.
It's very much like war.
Yeah.
It truly is.
So those are good distinctions between tribe and community. From a shamanic perspective, how can tragedy and disaster lead to tribal living?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that because it makes me think about how tribes get formed amidst tragedy. So let's go back. I'm from Maine, so I remember really well what happened when we had a very, very significant ice storm here in the it was in the 1990s, and it cut off the electrical power for a huge percentage of the inhabitants of this state. We were rendered literally without any source of heat, unless you happen to burn wood, and no electrical power. And people still tell stories to this day, all the time, about what happened as a result of that. Neighbors came together with their neighbors. They created community dinners. They found ways, okay, I have some eggs in my refrigerator. Oh, I have some hamburger in my freezer that's going to go bad anyway. Let's get it out. And they got together and they had community meals. They figured out who had enough propane to keep somebody's pipes from freezing and who had sleeping bags that others could use, who had wood stoves, and other people moved into their homes temporarily so that they could stay warm. They created tribe. And to this day, people talk about it, and they talk about how wonderful it was. It was an amazingly powerful, loving experience of tribe. And you would think that people would not have nostalgia about, a really, really difficult time. And yet they have this nostalgic memory because of the tribal experience of it all. People coming together for common good, for survival, and really loving each other and caring about each other, even though many of those neighbors had never even met each other before this incident occurred. So that's how I believe, that's just a mini example of how when disaster happens, people come together. It happens when there are tornadoes in the Midwest. It happens when there are floods. It happens when there is a fire and people become homeless as a result. People come together for the sake of sharing in order to survive and in order to support each other emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, and in all ways. And so, in fact, I was reading in I've been recently reading Sebastian Junger's most recent book that he entitles Tribe. One of the things I was reading in that new publication of his, that new book of his, is that on a grander scale, his studies have shown that in Great Britain, there are people who still, talk about the days of the bombings and the ways in which they had to take shelter and, live in tunnels and basements in order to survive the bombings. And there are some people who still say they miss that. They miss that time of being together in a tribal kind of way where their survival, lighting candles in the darkness, singing, supporting each other's children, coming up with games and ways to keep themselves from going mad. They have a certain nostalgia for that. Certainly nobody would wish for more bombs, but they have nostalgia for that experience of tribe. And it's something that we typically don't get to experience much anymore unless we are in a situation of survival for the sake of each, for the sake of each other's survival.
So you've jumped to the next question, which is, given Sebastian Junger's book called Tribe, do you, as a shamanic practitioner, agree with this premise in his book? And as you're talking, I'm thinking about small towns in America, where I grew up in one, and ceremonies, that the towns that have ceremonies, I think, end up having kind of a sense of place and create tribe better. Mm-hmm. Like the Fireman's Carnival and the lawn fete to support the hospital. And these are social activities that the Lions Club comes out and does the burgers, and everyone can look forward to it every year. And you bump into people, and it's a way that the tribe comes together. American Indians had regular conferences where they would meet with other tribes. They had a cadence to their year of connecting. Mm-hmm. And I think the importance of ceremony in creating tribe. Does Junger speak to ceremony?
He speaks to the way in which ceremony is performed by the indigenous tribals people. And he does talk about how, ceremony gets created when people come together in times of disaster. And for instance, I find it quite fascinating that here in New England, there is a huge movement now. It isn't like anybody started talking about it. Just out of nowhere, all of a sudden, everybody wants to have a fire pit in their backyard, if they have a backyard. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to have a fire pit because they want to get together with people and sit around outdoors around a fire, sing songs, eat hot dogs or whatever, and just be together. And that has just kind of come out of, quote, the blue. And I believe that it's happening because people are yearning for that tribal experience, that coming together of ceremony. Because when you have a fire in the middle of a circle, what you've created is a ceremony, whether you realize it or not. You have created people coming together around a particular element, and in this case, it's fire. So from a shamanic perspective, what I'm seeing is that people are, they're allowing themselves to be drawn. They're yearning to be drawn to creating ceremony, even if they don't realize they're creating ceremony. And to answer your original question, yes, I believe that ceremony is an integral part of the tribe. And if you look at it from, for instance, let's talk about soldiers, in, whether you're talking about Vietnam or Iraq or or, any of the Gulf Wars or Afghanistan, the Korean War, the Second World War, there were rituals and ceremonies that these people did together, whether it was, morning muster or, singing a particular song when they ate their meals together, or, sundown was a time for, going together, and, in Afghanistan, for instance, where it was hot as heck during the day, the soldiers would come together and play games when it was cooler. So they created ceremony. It isn't what we always would consider like, we think of ceremony as having something more pomp and circumstance associated with it. But ceremony really is something that you do together with lots of other people for the sake of creating an honoring of each other, and a fun and celebration. And so ceremony is an important part, I believe, of creating tribe.
Soldiers also almost always have come out of a hard time, even if they don't go to war, because they've been through boot camp.
That's right.
So you have a shared experience, even if you weren't at the same boot camp, to talk about as well.
Absolutely.
This completes the prepared questions we have about tribe versus community. Do you have anything else you would like to add at this time?
I would like to just end here by saying that it's important, I believe, for all of us to stop and take stock of where we are in our lives and how we already might be part of a tribe, or how we might want to create tribe in ourselves, in our community, and in our small groups, so that we fulfill this heart's yearning to be a part of something that is greater than ourselves and has a strong connection to being recognized as an individual, while at the same time being a part of an important grouping of people that has a cause, that has a purpose, that has a meaning, and has heart.
Thank you for listening to Dory Cote on Shamanism. We'd love to hear your thoughts, stories, reactions, and questions. Come on over to dorycote.com and join the conversation. And tune in next week for more on this subject, or next month for a new subject. You can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, or sign up on dorycote.com to receive notices when the podcasts are posted. That's Dory, D-O-R-Y, and Cote, C-O-T-E.com. Drumming and rattling by Dory Cote and Terry Morgan. Technical assistance and audio production by JillHackett.com. And this is Susan Savelle, wishing you many blessings in your life. We hope to have you join us next time.